Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast. And I have a guest that I've been wanting to meet. I think we've actually crossed paths even physically rather, but have never formally met. I'll let him introduce himself to you. And if you could please state your name and spell it, because some people are only accessing this audioly, and
Sure.
and I use the example for the longest time. One of the commentators, reporters on National Public Radio, whose name is Aaron Roth. I thought he was saying Amun Ra. I thought he was the sun god. So that's the reason.
I've always been totally confused by Marco Werman, whether it was an Irish name or
yeah, or Jewish. Mark O for, I don't know, Oscar, and then Werman, right? Werman.
But just for my fan base out there, my first name is Ben, spelled just like Ben, B-E-N, and the last name is Martinez, just like Pedro, M-A-R-T-I-N-E-Z.
Okay. The middle name. Hussein.
Ronald. No, it's actually Ronald.
It is Ronald. Okay, I was like, why are you shouting my name?
But you remember back when Obama was running that there was a great flap about his traitorous and Muslim middle name. There was. It was all over. It was all over the right wing.
No. Now I'm putting two and two together.
Yes. So there was a reaction. A number of people began to adopt Hussein as their middle name for Facebook.
Okay. All right.
My mother named me Ronald, and she'd be shocked to find out that I was actually a Hussein.
Or as Ricky Ricardo once said, that explains it, Lucy. So, Ben, you are former faculty member at Swain?
I was. I taught there for some 20 years.
Okay, so that makes number two, because Jim Bobrick was the first one that I interviewed.
Right, and he was in the humanities department, and I think toward the end he was the head of the humanities department.
Yes. So let's roll back. Let's focus on Swain alone. How did you get to become part of that august organization?
It was a little odd. I was a fourth year student at Cooper Union, and looking at prospects, and I think I was one of three people from that graduating class that year. That was 71. To find a teaching job, which at that time was, it's a teaching job. My God, I'm going to ascend to heaven. And I got tagged by Paul Ressica, who was teaching at Cooper at that time. And Paul said, there's this wonderful school up in New England. They have a beautiful place in New England. It's a long twilights. They have beautiful light. And he recommended me. And I interviewed with David Smith, and the rest is history.
Now this was in 71.
71. I was there from 71 to, I was there for 3 years. So I guess I was there till 74. And then my then wife and I packed it in, and we went to live in Italy for a year, traveled around, and then came back to New York City. And I spent a year in New York City just doing jobs. I worked in a couple of art supply stores. I'm in the framing department of an art supply store on 53rd Street. And then David called up again, and he said, "Wouldn't you like to?" And at first I said, I don't think so, because I still had visions of myself conquering New York. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. But I called him back and I said, yeah, why not? And so we came back here. I remember for the first time I came here, we had left New York it was the end of 71. New York was there were Black Panthers and guardian angels and sort of, garbage in the streets and people yelling at one another. So I was a little bit kind of happy to land in this little enchanted island here. First thing that happened was we pulled our U-Haul truck up to a coffee and eggs place to get some lunch, and lunch cost $1.50. I thought, this is different. And then when I came out, I found there was a ticket on my U-Haul truck, and I pulled the ticket off the windshield, and the ticket was for $1.
I want to live here forever.
I thought I've arrived. I've died and gone to heaven or something. Yeah. That was kind of how I wound up here.
It was that way. I remember when I worked for the Office of Historic Preservation, which was 77. It was when I graduated from University of Miami.
Working with Tony Souza at that time?
Yes, we're Tony Souza. And we actually budgeted ourselves, the crew, $10 a week for lunch. And we still had money left over for cigarettes and stuff, because we actually found places, Joe Marshall's, Kowloon's, the Blue Whale. You could get lunch for $1.
I remember. This is one of the advantages of being an old guy.
Yeah, it's kind of sucks now, because when you're like, well, I used to be able to get that for scratch. And potato salad on the side for free.
Spend my time lecturing all the young people, right?
Yeah. What was your experience like in Swain? And I'm going to predicate that on, what is this passion amongst the Swaineys, the alum, that the advancement officers at UMass Dartmouth cannot fathom? There is this passion that is just, it's more than piss and moan.
Yeah, no. The kids who were there had a wonderful time. I mean, look, when you're at the beginning of things, every day is getting out of bed and rubbing your hands and saying, art, let's go. And those kids came into the class with exactly that kind of passion. And I think it was, socially and developmentally, just as an episode in your life, it was a wonderful time for them. You made new friendships. You learned. The rate of progress when you're beginning seems so accelerated that every single day you seem like you're learning something new. I mean, that here I go back with my aging shtick, but as you get older, those insights and those new things tend to slow down. But I think it was just a wonderful time for those kids. What's really impressive is that 30 years out, there are so many friendships that have been maintained, and the batting average is fairly high. I would say, maybe 30 to 40% of those grads are still in the game, which I consider a high batting average for an art school. So I just think it was a beautiful time for them. A time of learning, a time of connecting with other people. It's a time of acquiring your own agency. All those things just make it great. And it was a good little studio school. It was a place where you learned solid things about drawing and color matching and life class stuff. And it was not just basic. There were I think really intelligent and far-reaching conversations with a lot of the faculty, between a lot of the faculty and students. I think that's what it was for them. I should say that in the longer term, I was a notably unsuccessful college teacher. I think that the experience that the students had was very different from the experience of being a faculty member and attending meetings and getting involved in the politics and what did I just do? There it is. In the politics and the other stuff, the bureaucracy of any school, is not fun. And I was notably, I think, not good at it. I think I was not very well equipped to be a college teacher in that sense. When I closed the door to the studio and when I was teaching the kids, it was heaven. It was just a wonderful time.
My experiences with the school were, I'm the BFA class of 75 at SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University. Sure. And we hung around with the Swaineys, and they hung around with us, and we had our opinion of the Swaineys. We thought they were great designers, but we thought we were far superior painters. And it's funny because I said that to so many of them, and it's funny how a lot of them thought the opposite.
Interesting. Nationalism will out, you know.
Yeah, and the Rodman House and the Rasta Band and all those things going on. It really was kind of wonderful. Even though we were in a university setting, we were an island unto ourselves. And going to Swain on Hawthorne Street, and the original studios, and it was cool. There's just no other more elevated word I could use than cool.
Yeah. I think that the DNA of the school, it was in a certain way, it was almost similar to the DNA of Cooper Union. Cooper Union was founded by a guy who made his first money in the glue business, and then made some more money making railway, not the ties. What are the metal thing? Railway rails.
Rails, yeah.
Making rails,
yeah.
And eventually he used those rails to build as a structure for building the original building. But I think Swain also began as a school, obviously, for teaching trades to working class kids. And I always liked that about Swain, that the students we served were from working class families. They were serious. They didn't have time or money to waste, and they had made this impractical decision, which was to go be an artist, which I thought was rather brave of any kid, whose parents do a 9-to-5 like my parents did. I related to that.
And even in the crazy 70s, where pretty much anything went, there was always that pregnant pause when you said, you want to go to art school, or there was the gorilla in the room, and nothing's really changed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I remember, my stepfather always finding good until I started bringing home some news. Now, this guy is a fisherman, right. And I've seen some, I saw some calendars on his boat.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
That was the art you knew when you began, right?
Exactly. Now, the other thing, the interaction between the faculty and the students, because, again, David Loeffler Smith, I'm surprised that nobody's, you guys haven't collected money and erected a statue to this guy.
Yeah, sorry.
And I'm not being facetious. I understand that because I belong to a group of about 15 BFA 75s. It's called TECM. It's an abbreviation for Tenure, Elliott, Cummings, and McCoy. Because those four men impacted our lives in ways that we had no idea we were being impacted back then. How did you feel about your fellow faculty members? Your interactions with them, or is it the same old as in most cutthroat art departments?
Yeah, I think that I think I had 15 good years there out of the 20, and the last 5 years were certainly, there was a sense of the Titanic going downhill.
Yeah,
not down. The Titanic didn't go downhill; it went under the waves. I think that once times got hard and we had to turn to the program and artisanry thing to keep the school going, that was a very expensive proposition. In terms of running an art school and balancing the books, you can run a life class with a naked person, some heat, and some good light, and a box to stand on. Bring your own easel, whatever. But of course, to run an artisanry program, you need machinery. All those loom, all that woodworking stuff, all that pottery stuff. Those things cost money. And I think the program in artisanry eventually sank the balance sheet at Swain, as I see it. I liked a lot of those people, and I respected a lot of them, but I think it was just a wrong move, and it just it put an end to the school in terms of the original DNA of the school. It I don't know how to put that. Yeah.
Now, speaking of which, were you part of the migration, the Great Migration?
I was not. I
Okay.
was not, which of course pissed me off royally. But I think in the long run that was fine. I think that I found there was a life after Swain.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait a second. Hang on. I'm going to find you again. There we are. Sorry, I touched something and I went away.
No problem.
No, I left the school and I went, and that was rough. I mean, because that was an interruption of a career that had been, as I said, some 20 years long. I wound up that year teaching at BU. I taught a kind of a design history class there. I had by that time co-authored 2 books about design, which I now think are better forgotten. With my then wife, and I went to BU, taught for a year there, and I found that it was kind of like any other art school, but with elevators. You know, there was just there were faculty frictions. There was the faculty member who was the power center of the department. There were people walking up and down the halls looking at one another like heirs at a wake. And I lasted a year there before I got the boot. Then I simply went off and found a job for that suited me for the next 20 years.
As far as those 2 design history books, could you tell us what those titles were? Because I would like to ask my wife, who is also a design history teacher.
One was called Visual Forces. And damn if I can remember the name of the other one. It's been so long. I can't remember the name of the smaller one. The bigger one was called Visual Forces.
Okay.
They're published by Prentice Hall, and Prentice Hall is a publishing outfit that does everything from how to make collages with toilet paper to really decent books on art history and things like that. So it's a big household.
Going back to DNA, because it's funny you mentioned that, because when Jeff Watton and I first began this concept of the artist index, I kept using the term DNA, and that was before DNA became popular and most people knew what the heck it really was, and before they spit into a tube, And then we had to drop it because then they got really confused. They thought they had to donate some sort of bodily fluids or something like that. But there is a DNA, and there is a DNA because David Loeffler Smith was a student of Hans Hofmann. And Hofmann with Hawthorne, going back that far back, the whole Cape Cod school. What were your teachers, by the way?
My teachers at
Cooper Union.
Very first, thinking about Cooper Union, my teachers were Paul Georges, who was a great sort of I always referred to him as the Hun of Canal Street. He was a big, unruly presence. Who
I thought you were going to say something else.
He spent his time getting into fights with everybody he could get into, and I admired him immensely and tried to emulate him. Paul Ressica was there. There was a wonderful abstract painter by the name of Nick Marsicano, who was an old school Abex painter. There was a wonderful teacher named Stefano Cusimano, who's totally forgotten, but you took his class from freshman year and you learned how to draw, God damn it, or not. Ressica, Leland Bell came on board. The nice thing about Cooper Union was that it was right at the corner of 8th Street and Astor Place, and it meant that within a half-mile radius there were so many working artists who were big guns, who were real artists, and if you're a kid from the suburbs, as I was, that was incredibly impressive and influential.
Would you say that the Swain vibe was similar to Cooper Union? Because Cooper Union was the type of place where people just walked into a drawing class at one time, back in the, I guess, 40s and 50s.
No, I think there was something very different about Cooper Union, which was that, and this was the 70s, of course, whatever kind of fish you were, the water you swam in was abstract painting. Cooper Union was very responsive to the students who went there. And they gathered us at the end of our freshman year. They said, "Okay, you're going into studio stuff in your second year now. Who do you want to have for teachers? We'll go out and we'll drag them out of their lofts and we'll pay them. We'll bring them here." Wow,
Wow.
We made a list. We said, "Get this one, get that one." We put Leonard Anderson on the list, I think, for the really figurative people. Anderson wasn't interested in that. He at that time was teaching in Brooklyn College and was having a perfectly good time there. I studied with him for a year when I was very young, just barely out of high school at the Art Students League. But the school was, as I said, whatever kind of fish you were, you swam in the water of abstraction. There were lots of abstract painters. Minimalism was a very big thing at that time. Earthworks were huge. Everybody was talking about Richard Serra and Donald Judd. And the fact that we could, in fact, have figurative friendly painters was a nice thing, but they were not provincial people. They understood figuration and they understood abstraction. Certainly a guy like Leland Bell had been an abstract painter. Georges was a former Hoffman student. So you got, in a sense, to expect to be contradicted, expect to find differences everywhere. And I would say that Swain was more homogeneous in that it was from the very beginning a figurative school based on a vision of French painting, and what French painting stood for. Whatever you did at Cooper Union, someone would come along and say, "You're still doing that? You should be doing this."
Yeah.
And you got used to that. You got used to that give and take pretty quickly. That's a good thing to do. I remember one of Rackstraw Down's remarks. He said that the best thing that ever happened to figurative painting was abstract painting. And I think that's true.
It's true. I mean, I've been an abstractionist for most of my professional life up until just around December, where a great episode occurred. I'll tell you, off camera or off podcast, because the show's about you, not about me. But but now looking at abstract expressionism, it's kind of interesting where everything is. But anyway, let's go back to Swain. Who were some of your colleagues there beside James Bobrick?
In the humanities department, there was Nick Kilmer and Leo Kelly, who were wonderful writers and poets. Art history, I remember most of all Judith Tolnick, who now I think, what is she, the editor-in-chief of Art New England or something like that? Haven't seen Judith in a few years. The painting faculty were David Smith at the head of it, and two students of his, Dick Doherty and Sig Haynes, of course. That was kind of, the people that I interacted with the most. In sculpture, we had Russ Daly, who was a big metal welding guy whose work reminded me a little bit of Judd or Serra. He was in that school. The printmaker before Mark, I forget who. Oh, that was John Osborne was the printmaking guy there before Mark came on board. And there was some churn, but it was mostly there was kind of a stable quality to the departments. They didn't go too crazy in terms of people coming and going until things got, as I said, less stable with the whole period of the program and artisanry and the lean years.
Now, Dick Doherty, for some reason that name is ringing a bell. Did he remain a painter? Did he go into design?
I don't know. He's someone I lost contact with, and I've not been particularly close to him over the years. So he, I think after Swain, he was I think he was one of the other people who did not go on to UMass Dartmouth, if I'm remembering correctly. He found a job, I think, down south somewhere.
Okay. He wasn't from the Midwest originally, was he?
No, he was a Cape Cod kid.
Oh, okay. All right. Just another Dick Doherty. Have you been back to a fine arts school, an art school at all? And if you have, what was the first thing that hit you about it?
I'm not understanding the question. What
do you mean? Have you visited like the CVPA or another art school or whatever, and what did you walk away with?
No, I don't. I haven't visited the CVPA and know relatively little about it. My feeling about art schools is that you don't want to be in art school forever. You want to get out and be in your studio and go be whatever kind of artist you were meant to be. I think also I would say another thing about DNA and Cooper Union, which was that the teachers that were most admired there, it was bifurcated a little bit. There were career teachers who had been there year after year after year after year, and there were these crazy lone wolves and painters and sculptors who they were loft rats basically, and they came and went. The loft rats were the ones you admired the most, I think, not the career teachers. And this may have been a sort of a romantic thing about being young, but the career teachers were a little bit thought of as, I think, by my cohort anyway, as kind of time servers. They were interesting. They taught classes here and there, but what you really wanted to do was to find out, who the hell was living in Soho and making noise and doing great work and get them in here. That was the emphasis on it. So in a certain sense, teaching was a little bit in bad odor. It was at that time, I think our mindset as Cooper Union students was that, well, you can be a teacher if you want. And I did wind up being a teacher for 20 years. But I thought of myself, I tried always to think of myself as a teaching artist who didn't really want to be primarily a teacher. Mm-hmm. I remember one year I had a funny confrontation with a very challenging student. He got mad at me. He yelled at me. And he said, just admit it. You don't really want to be here, do you? And I said, you're saying that as if it's some kind of wonderful secret. I mean, the reason I'm an effective teacher is because I don't think of myself as an art teacher first. I think of myself as, a guy in a room making my own work. And I also come in here and teach you. And so kiss my ass, buddy. No, I didn't say that. I said,
yeah.
It was a little bit like that. And I think that's kind of been my attitude. When I taught really hard. I gave the students everything I had. And I did the best teaching I could do. But I tried to think of myself at the end of the day as well. I did my teaching. Now let's get back to the studio.
Was teaching by especially the lone wolves considered a safety net that, only real tightrope guys do it without a net? Was that the thing that was still back then?
I'm not sure. If you're talking about the faculty that taught me at Cooper Union, these were all guys with careers, and they sold paintings.
Yeah.
So some of them maybe didn't sell enough painting to become. Some of them didn't go into orbit. I mean, Leland Bell was a well-respected, in my book, master teacher, but he never went into orbit in the way that Alex Katz did or something like that. He never sold paintings for $1 million. So that if they were teaching sometimes to supplement their income, they were doing it to supplement their income. But I think they also thought of themselves as, well, I can teach or I cannot teach. It's not crucial to me unless maybe I'm in a financial crunch that year and I need to teach. They came and went. There was a lot of churning.
Yeah,
and that was also different from Swain School.
How so?
Well, I mean, that teachers would come for a year or two and then they'd be gone, whereas Swain faculty tended to be there longer.
Okay,
like yours truly. Yeah.
Did you run into a Jack Wolf while you were in New York?
No, the name doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, all right.
Who was he?
Jack Wolf was a painter. He had a phenomenal career. I mean, he was hanging in all the best galleries, and I did a piece about him. He passed away. 2001, I think it was. I did a piece on him because this is a guy who was rocking and rolling. I had people like clamoring after him, and he basically said, something to the effect that all the gallery owners were scum-sucking pigs who cared nothing about the artists and only about money. And he told them to go screw themselves. He turned on his heel, went to his studio in Stoughton, where he stayed until the day he died. And the guy was phenomenal. He was absolutely phenomenal. The truth of it is I went on a job search, an expedition to Bridgewater State, and one of his diptychs was up on that little stage that they have for the Anderson Gallery up there. And I thought the man was a black artist. I honestly did.
Interesting.
It just sort of hit me that I didn't think, it never entered in my mind that a white guy could actually paint this, what I saw, because it was a bunch of black men and women on a stoop in New York City. And I I flashbacked on that because I grew up, for 6 years of my life. I was between Madison and Fifth in the upper 90s or lower hundreds across from Mount Sinai Hospital. And then, and then we did the reverse Jeffersons. My mother and I, she had a falling out with her uncle, and we went to the west side on Columbus Avenue. So
was
I
your
saw
mom
that.
African American?
No, my mom was Portuguese.
For your dad?
No.
That's
but I grew up. See, when I went to the west side, my babysitters, all of our neighbors. So I grew up in a very eclectic, very racially mixed environment as a kid. And
we call that New York City, right?
They call that New York City. I mean, I had a nonna, I had a bachi, I had, all the people that watch me. So, boobies, that kind of thing. And when I saw it, it was very, very powerful, because it wasn't just really a painting of, 8 or 9 black men and women. Each one was a portrait. And so anyway, he was absolutely phenomenal. I was kind of floored by that whole thing.
I think, not to interrupt your claim, but I think this whole, obviously the disgruntlement about the gallery scene and the way money comes and goes is not new. It happened to the Abax painters finally when they began to make money. There's a funny story about, I think it was Lichtenstein or something, yelling at Ron Lauder, saying, "You son of a bitch, you sold my painting for, $70,000. You bought it for $4,500. You better buy the fucking next one, because I made that money for you." And then you've probably seen that recent documentary called The Price of Everything.
Yeah.
Have you?
I only saw the promos on it, but it pretty much gutted the whole, the whole culture.
Yeah, what was interesting about that program was how badly everyone was willing to behave on camera. The gallery woman thought that she was bad. I think Larry Poons was playing to the camera by sort of dipping his hand into the paint and slapping it onto the palette with his fist. The kind of funny kind of distortion that these astronomical prices have now exerted on everyone's behavior, on everyone's psyche, is just amazing. Well, when the Abax guys began to make money, there's a story about someone, I think it was someone like, I don't know who, George McNeil, or one of the second or third rank people that you would hear of. He sold a painting for $2,000. He took the money in cash and brought it home, and he slept with it that night because he'd never seen so much money. Those guys had grown up in walk-up with bathtubs in the kitchen and things like that. It's such a different world, and that's okay too.
I mean, Schnabel's biopic of Basquiat was really interesting. I mean, the whole Mary Boone thing. There's this whole bunch of people who are just floating around like clouds. Right. Yeah.
And you saw the phenomenon of gallery owners themselves becoming stars.
Yeah.
Becoming the main event in their gallery, along with the artists. But certainly Mary Boone and all those people. They wanted to be known as personalities. Yeah. It was kind of bizarre. I can see your work in the background. Anybody with eyes could pick up Matisse and Picasso. Where did the influences come from for you? I was always a picture maker, and I think I can remember being a little kid drawing pictures on the floor in my underwear for hours and hours and being fascinated by the fact that you could make a picture and put anything into it and take anything out of it. I think a great early influence was a guy named Francis Cunningham at the Brooklyn Museum. He was a very tonal painter, an observational painter, and I took a life class with him as a high school student, and he pushed me over to studying with Leonard Anderson. Anderson was a very beautiful, remarkable painter, and interested in classic art, interested in Italian art and French art and things like that. Piero della Francesca and Balthus and people like that. It's hard to say beyond that. I think that the earliest influences were the ones that maybe stuck with me the most. Maybe it was Anderson and Paul George's. Even though I learned stuff from people like Ressica, and I love studying with Leland Bell. One of the things that happens when you go to art school is that people throw a lot of stuff at you. You learn a lot of stuff, especially if you're going to a modern university art school with their different departments and their printmaking and their this and their that. At a certain point, you ask yourself, what really sticks to me? What really sticks to me over the long run? I come out of art school encrusted with all this knowledge, with all these viewpoints, talking about this and talking about that. But after a while, that tumult sort of dies down in your head. You're still by yourself working in your studio, and you have to reassess what was it that was transient, that just was thrown at me in art school, and what was it that pre-existed that was there before I went to art school and that is still there now. And for me, I think it's a matter of thinking about painting as picture making. Although there's abstract painting I love and look at, I was never an abstract painter. I was always a picture maker. And as I said, I think it was a good thing that there were so many abstract painters around at the time that I was studying. You learned a lot from them, and your painting got better because of them.
So where were you born? Where did you grow up? All that.
I grew up in Staten Island, which is a suburb of New York, and it's the least New York suburb. It's really a backyard to New Jersey. Staten Island, when I was a teenager, was still very, very rural. There were truck farms and cows and things like that. I can remember going out landscape painting when I was 13 or 14, and having to shoo the cows away from the easel. It was that rural a place, but it was also culturally, out of it. I mean, my parents were working people. They were not people who had ever heard of a book. They watched TV. They did their jobs. They went to work. And the interesting thing about being on Staten Island is that if you ride the bike down to the ferry depot, down to St. George, you can see this thing across the harbor glittering with tall towers, and you're 13 years old and you're on your bike, and actually it's free to put your bike on the ferry. And so I began to do that, and I began to ride around Lower Manhattan as a young teenager, and to begin to think about art and New York City.
Now, New York City, we're ratcheting it back to the 60s.
Yeah. As I said, I graduated high school in 66. I worked for a year as an office boy or something, because my parents said, don't waste your time going to college. And then I picked myself up and went to college. Yeah. So I was there from the late 60s through the early 70s at Cooper Union.
That was still the heyday. I mean, things were still going. Yeah. I mean, I've been the film. I forgot his name now. Done by that famous director of the abstract expressionist, sitting on step ladders. I remember seeing that, and that was another thing that just stuck in the crevices of my mind. And that's why the podcast as well, because wow. There's Rauschenberg. You can actually see him, but he's not still. He's moving and he's speaking. I can hear his voice, the quality of his voice. I can hear what he says.
So that they were actually real living artists out there, and they lived in this place that was across the harbor from where you lived, if you were me.
Yeah.
I can recall trying to find out where people like Franz Klein actually had their lofts so that I could bicycle over there and look up and say, can I see Klein? I don't see him there, but I heard that he's there. This was tremendous. I think as a young teenager, I was a pretentious and culturally snobby little guy. I wanted to wear a beret and see French art movies. That was what I aspired to, and of course I aspired to art, whatever that was, which no one could tell me in where I came from. So I had to go seek it out there. I remember the first art book I ever had was this little tiny book by a 19th century German art historian named Salomon Reinach. The book was called Apollo, and it was meant to be a survey of, respectable art. Little tiny engravings, black and white engravings in the book. And I looked at that book, and it was my first art book. And then the first time I went to the Metropolitan Museum, I wanted to see the masterpiece that had been reproduced postage stamp size in this book in black and white. And I was so disappointed and discomforted because the little reproductions were so perfect. They were like postage stamps. They were flawless. And when you got up close to a Rembrandt, what you could see is, a smear here and a blob there, and it was just like he was painting a sign or a wall or something. There were drips here and there, and I thought, this can't be right. So it took a year or two for me to accommodate myself to the fact that paintings had a physicality and that they weren't simply made on printing presses.
That moment of awakening. I mean, you said, a little kid on the floor in your underwear, drawing and such. But that moment of awakening. I mean, or was it? Are you one of those people who's just like you never questioned it? It was there. It's always been there, and you move forward.
Yeah. It was always there. I was the class artist when I was in second grade. That was what people told me, because I could draw better than the other second graders, and that was. I never lost that idea because it seemed to me to be something so different. Whatever it was, it seemed to be something so different from my surroundings, the people, the adults, and the other kids that made up my life then. That there was no way I wasn't going to find out about that and be one of those, whatever that was.
I first took notice of you on Facebook with your posts from Italy, primarily. And I what's the word I would describe? It wasn't jealousy or envy. It was admiration because I thought that was very cool. And then then all of a sudden my life just totally did a complete spin. I don't even know which direction you would want to say, it's a 360 or 180, whatever it is. And I ended up living in Portugal for a year. And now, and I would say to myself, so I want to talk to Ben Martinez someday about this and tell him about it because, wow.
How was that for you?
Yeah, exactly.
Big transformative experience.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can't let go, and thank God I've been able to at least duplicate it here, is the coffee. I got myself a nice little DeLonghi, not very expensive, as long as it has 15 bars, and I got Lavazza coffee, and it's the crema. I mean, to me, that's like, I'm sorry, it's wet your pants. It's a wet your pants experience, and it's not like American coffee, which is thin and acrid and it's way too caffeinated. When I returned, I couldn't understand why my lips would quiver when I would have an American coffee, which was disgusting to me, but there was nothing else available. And if you did get an espresso, it was like, oh my God, it was like the bottom of a pot. It was awful.
Yeah, I would love for friends and acquaintances from Italy to come and visit one day, and let me return the hospitality that they always gave to me. But I'm terrified, what the hell am I going to do for coffee for them? I can make it here in the kitchen with a little mocha, but if I take them down to here or there, we won't mention names, places that serve coffee in town, what shall I do? It's a real problem for me. I made my first trip to Italy when I was my third year of Cooper Union, and I've always been an Italophile, going from someone who first approached it as the romance of Italy, the great art, the this and the that, to understanding that it's a place where people live. They have their ups and their downs and their victories and their defeats. The Battlelato itself is a rural town, relatively poor, very, very beautiful. But that doesn't mean there aren't people there who don't drive late model cars, you know, and who watch American TV. You know, they know what HBO is and things like that. It's not all farmers and peasants, but there are still people in that town who it's almost like watching the tail end of a dying way of life. The older people began their lives digging in the dirt with sticks, you know, piling up rocks to make walls, and that was how they began, you know, back in 1910 or whatever. Mm-hmm. They made something for themselves. So it's always been interesting for me just to be in Italy, to see the landscape and to think about how the towns and the hill towns and the cities sort of fit into this matrix that's very, very ancient. It's been, you know, they have relatively few wild forests and things like that as we do here, because Italy has been combed for so many thousands of years. It's been domesticated.
What is the closest big city to?
Probably the closest big city is Reggio. Reggio, yeah, right down on the toe. Sort of a modern city, and it faces across the strait. You can see Sicily. It's a 20-minute boat ride to go from Reggio to Messina.
Yeah. I found out my DNA. It's kind of bizarre. When I had it, we were talking about DNA before. My DNA, I expected, you know, my father's French, so I expected to have a big percentage, but I'm 67% Iberian. You know, my mother's Portuguese, and I'm 16% Sicilian.
Interesting. So you've got the tar brush all over you. You know.
Yeah.
I probably, if I did that trick, I'd find out that a certain percentage of me was Taino Indian from Puerto Rico.
From Puerto Rico, yeah. Not so many people know about the Tainos. The other thing too is, how long have you lived in East Clinton Street?
Oh, it's my girlfriend's house. I have my own house.
Okay.
My own house is over on Walden Street, and currently I'm renting it out to a couple of tenants. Okay. I moved in with my girlfriend a few years back, and I made a studio space for myself in a fairly small room at the back of her house. It's very luminous, very, very light filled.
Yeah, I can see that. The reason why I'm asking is I lived on 203, which is the second from the last house on the right, heading towards Park, because Park cuts through there.
Yeah, it's a sweet neighborhood.
Yeah. Don Wilkinson's just around the corner.
Yes, Don's on, I think, what is it? Something Terrace, Hawthorne Terrace.
No, it's Chancery. He's on Chancery. That's a cross street. That's a cross street to that. And then Max Farrow, who I worked for as well, for the Office of Historic Preservation, was on your side of the street. So I'm just trying to.
I think opposite side of the street. He was in that beautiful carriage house, right?
The carriage house, the pink one, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's about two houses up on the opposite side of the street. Right. He hasn't been in Bedford in years and years, has he?
No, he passed away a couple of years ago now. Yeah, and I think whoever was left, they sold the place a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself now? We're going to start wrapping this up. Where do you see yourself now, especially because this has touched all of us? It's something that hasn't gone away, and I don't think it is going to go away, not as rapidly as, you know, instant gratification Americans want. Yeah. How is the pandemic affecting you primarily as a painter?
Well, the pandemic is a good time to sit and think quietly, because sitting isn't forced, first of all, or quarantining isn't forced, and I think the pandemic affects people differently depending on what age they are. I am approaching 72. I'm practically a monument, and so I'm thinking about other kinds of disruptions that happened in this country, the Vietnam War, Nixon, the string of Republicans that were in office for, oh my God, an astonishingly long period of time. How it affects me in particular, I'm not sure it really comes into the studio. I think the studio has for me always been a place where when you close the door, you're in the studio and the other stuff goes away. But I did make I recently put up on Facebook a so-called plague painting that I'd made, which is an attempt to sort of use the rhetoric of sort of Baroque painting and figuration and all of those things to address or to make an image about this crisis. I don't know how effective it will be in the long run. I've more recently just become more introspective. My girlfriend and I actually read from the Old Testament for an hour every Sunday morning, and that it's a gory, sort of violent account of religion. There's murder, there are massacres, there are kings that come and go, there's wife swapping, there's really a remarkable amount of sex.
Yeah, Judas and Holofernes. That's always a popular one.
Holofernes. I'm actually working on a painting of Lot and his daughters right now. I don't know if you can see that at all.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah,
I'm working on this thing.
Yeah,
and it's indirect, but I'm not sure I can give you a brushstroke for brushstroke equivalence between the studio work and the pandemic, but there is some connection there.
Yeah,
it does affect the work. Yeah.
Yeah, you probably only will notice it probably 5 years hence when you look back and go, "Oh my God!" Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because the
it could be
intuitiveness.
A situation where you see things in your painting. This is very common. You see things 5 years later that you didn't see.
Yeah.
And oh my God, did I paint that kind of thing? That may show up.
Let me ask you: do you ever have like paintings that are like, that you're like not disappointed totally in them, but they didn't turn you on either? You weren't happy and were going to go around showing everybody, and you stored them away and forgot about them, and then you're looking for something else, which that's always happens, and you come across it and you go, "Oh my God, how could I have not liked this? This is I'm sort of happy with myself."
Sure. I think when the paint is wet and you go and drag it back in there, what did I just do again? I just lost you, or I switched you around.
I'm still here.
When the paint is wet and you come back in the studio, there are plenty of days when you think, "Oh Jesus, I really don't know anything about this, do I?"
Yeah.
And then a month later, you look at it and go, "Well, that part's not so bad," and really, that looks kind of okay. And it's a common thing that I think artists experience, and I experience it a lot. I tend to work very slowly lately, and it takes me a long time to do even a small picture. I think I'm just much more meditative about it. One of the things I tried to do recently was to switch to painting on paper using acrylics and latex, just because I thought it would give me a faster image. And instead, what it did was it gave me an infinite number of opportunities to change my mind as I was working, which is totally a disaster.
2 final questions. Where do you think you are going now? Is the first one.
I think I'm going to continue to work in series. I think I'm going to try to make connections between one painting and another, and to, in a certain sense, almost to assign myself a kind of a job. Like, 17th century painters were given contracts. They were told, you have to put this in it, and this in it, and this in it. And I'm talking to myself in that way lately. I'm saying, okay, I've just begun this painting, but it's going to be a narrative painting. It's going to be about this, and this. It has to have X number of actors or props or whatever you want to call them in the picture. And I'm trying to force the issue a little bit. In a sense, I'm lately I'm more of a made-up painter than I am a straightforward observational painter. If I do something like a little self-portrait, that's to take a vacation.
Yeah. And the last question, what would you like to be remembered for?
That's a hard one. You kind of ask yourself, what's important in your life? Is it the painting? Is it the fact that I helped to raise 2 kids who grew up to be dynamic, interesting women? I'm not sure about that. I'm always trying to imagine the weight that art has against the weight that life has. And I don't necessarily think that combining art and life is really something I want to do. I'd rather keep the art separate from the life. and let it be as good as it can. But I'd also like to be remembered for some of the things I did in my life. Okay. There's a wonderful book by Joyce Carol Oates. It's a horrible book, but it's a wonderful book. It's called You Must Remember This, and it's a novel about a girl who has a terrible life with affairs with older men. But the one thing that brightens up her life is she takes piano lessons with an old sort of Viennese school piano teacher, and it's a wonderful thing for her. One day she talks to him about how much she loves art and how much she loves playing the piano, and he says to her, art it's just something you enter into, and while you're in it, but he says, but when you come out of it, you're not in it anymore. You're back in your life. And I think that's a little bit how I think about art too, that while you're in it, and it's good, but when you come out of it, there's all the usual chaos and and the love and the resentment and all those things that make up people's lives. It's out there.
Yeah, that's true. Ben, thanks so much. I'm so glad to have finally met you. Do you have an interesting looking bicycle? Let me ask you that question.
Oh, my big electric bike. I just spent the morning changing a blown out tire on it.
All right, so that was you. Okay, I mean, it's
the guy on the orange bike is me.
Okay, all right, yeah. It's kind of funny how you pass people by or people that you haven't seen before, and then you'll see them like for the rest of your life afterwards.
I'm notably bad with faces. I don't know why that is, but I hope to meet you in meet space someday.
Yes, we can have a proper cup of coffee.
On the other side of the plague, right?
Yeah, the closest place is only a short walk. Because I mean, from where I was on Clinton Street, I could be to the back of the Whaling Museum in 15 minutes.
All right,
and that's a good clip.
Espresso.
Well, this, believe it or not, Dookie's in the DeMello International Center has coffee straight out of the old country.
Oh, really? Is that place that had like Santander Bank and all that stuff?
Yes, exactly. Right in there. Yeah, and the whole Portuguese way of ordering their coffee is quite. I find the Portuguese sophisticated and simple at the same time. These are the same people who won't declare a vintage because who says it has to be a vintage every year?
Yeah.
So somebody asked me, "What's a good Portuguese wine?" I said, "A wine with numbers on it." What? If it has a year on it, it's a good wine.
Well, I was unaware of Dookie's. I've been mostly a Beira-Mar.
Beira-Mar, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's where Gloria de Sa hangs out because it's a lot of people from Figueira there.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let me wrap this up. Thanks again to our guest painter, Ben Martinez. This is Ron Fortier. It's been fun. This is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.